On the coldest winter nights in Northbridge, a poor waitress was humiliated by a rich kid in front of an entire diner. Mocked, filmed, drenched in cold beer while everyone looked away. But that moment of cruelty sparked something bigger than anyone expected. A US veteran and his German shepherd stepped in, uncovering a corrupt empire built on fear, lies, and power. What began as one act of humiliation turned into a silent war against the Keller family. Tax abuse, smear campaigns, threats, and a town divided. And when the truth finally came to light in front of the entire media, apologies were forced, justice was served, and a fallen soldier's last wish was finally honored. This is the story of dignity reclaimed, promises kept, and a veteran who refused to let evil win. Northbridge was the kind of winter town that looked frozen even when the sun was still up. A cluster of old brick buildings buried under layers of snow, streetlights flickering weakly through icy wind, and a silence that came not from peace, but from exhaustion. It was the kind of place where people hurried with their heads lowered, where breath turned instantly to fog, and where the cold didn't just sting skin. It seeped into bones, into wages, into the lives of those who were already struggling too hard. Snow piled against doorways, the roads glistened with black ice, and the air felt sharp enough to cut. On the far end of Maple Street, the neon sign of Lakeside Diner buzzed weakly, half frozen, illuminating the frosted windows of the only place still open this late. Inside, the diner was old, but clean, with red vinyl seats cracked from years of use and a heater that rattled like it was begging to retire. Elena Ruiz, 23 years old, moved quickly between tables, trying to keep warm through motion alone. She was thin, not from fashion but from life, her small frame wrapped in a faded burgundy uniform and an apron frayed at the seams. Her hair was long and dark brown, tied into a messy ponytail that revealed a soft, tired face with high cheekbones, chapped lips, and olive-toned skin reddened by the cold. Elena had the gentle eyes of someone who had been hurt more often than helped, and the quiet, careful steps of a person used to apologizing even when she hadn't done anything wrong. She wiped down the counter, trying to ignore the ache in her fingers, and reminded herself she only needed 2 more hours to finish her shift. 2 more hours to earn enough for rent, and to keep living the kind of life that felt permanently on the edge of collapse. But that night, the door of the diner burst open with a loud bang that made several customers flinch. A blast of icy wind swept in before a group of wealthy teenagers strutted through the entrance like they owned the place. Leading them was Brandon Keller, 19 years old, tall with broad shoulders, sharp jawline, perfectly styled golden hair, and the smug confidence of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. His expensive winter jacket, black, fur-lined, spotless, contrasted with the cracked floor tiles beneath his boots. Behind him came 3 other rich kids, all dressed in designer coats, laughing loudly, recording each other on their phones. They carried the thick arrogance of privileged youth and the casual cruelty of people who believed the world existed for their amusement. Brandon scanned the room, grinned when he saw Elena, and walked straight toward her, his boots leaving wet snow across the diner floor. "Hey, sweetheart," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery as he leaned closer. Elena stiffened. She knew his type. Northbridge was too small not to. Brandon Keller, son of Gregory Keller, the most powerful businessman in town. Brandon's reputation was well known. Trouble cloaked in wealth, always protected, always smirking. Elena attempted a polite, neutral tone. "Can I help you with something?" Brandon chuckled, glancing back at his friends who were already recording. "Yeah, you can entertain us." His friends snickered, and one of them whispered loudly, "Look at her uniform. Does she even own a mirror?" Elena swallowed hard, gripping her order pad. Please don't cause trouble. I'm just trying to work." Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept her chin up. Brandon stepped closer until Elena could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Work?" he said mockingly. "Come on, you call wiping tables and serving food work?" Elena tried to step back, but Brandon grabbed a cold beer bottle from his friend's hand, holding it carelessly by the neck. He stared at Elena with a wicked gleam in his eye. The kind of expression that revealed cruelty was not an accident for him. It was a hobby. The diner grew quieter. A few customers pretended not to see what was happening, staring down at their plates. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted trouble with the Kellers. Brandon lifted the bottle slowly, theatrically, enjoying the suspense, the power, the cameras pointed at him. "You look stressed," he said with a smirk. "Let me cool you off." Before Elena could move, Brandon tilted the bottle and dumped the freezing beer over her head. The liquid splashed down her hair, soaked her uniform, and dripped onto the floor. Elena gasped softly from the shock. The beer was icy cold, running down her neck, seeping under her shirt. Her hands shook. The smell of alcohol mixed with the metallic scent of winter clung to her skin. Brandon's friends roared with laughter, capturing every second on their phones. One of them shouted, "Do it again! She's like a pathetic sponge!" Someone in the diner whispered, "Poor girl." But no one stood up. No one dared. Elena stood frozen, humiliated, breathing unevenly as tears threatened to escape. Her whole body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the crushing weight of helplessness. She felt tiny, exposed, alone. Then, the door of the diner opened again. Not loudly this time, but with a slow, deliberate push that cut through the noise like a blade. A gust of snow swirled in, dancing around the boots of a man who stepped inside. He was tall and solidly built, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with a stern, weathered face cut by deep lines earned from years of service and survival. His hair was short, streaked with gray, his jaw strong and shadowed with stubble, his eyes sharp, quiet, and unblinking. Eyes that had seen battlefields far worse than any winter in Northbridge. He wore a heavy military cold-weather parka, frost dusting its shoulders, and beside him stood a large German shepherd, around 7 years old, muscular and alert, with a thick black and tan coat and intelligent amber eyes focused, immediately on Brandon's group. This was Jim Walker, a U.S. veteran known by almost no one in town, a man who preferred silence over spotlight, solitude over society. But fate had brought him to that door at the exact moment Elena Ruiz needed someone, anyone, to stand between her and cruelty. The diner seemed to freeze. Brandon's laughter died mid-breath. Jim's gaze swept the room once before settling on Elena, shivering, soaked in beer, eyes wide with humiliation. And in that instant, Jim recognized her face. Not exactly her eyes or her expression, but her features. Familiar, painfully familiar. She looked like someone he once knew. Michael Ruiz, her older brother, the man Jim fought beside in Afghanistan. The man who saved Jim's life twice. The man who died in Jim's arms with a final request. "If I don't make it home, look after my sister." That promise hit Jim like a knife of memory, sharpening his posture. Jim stepped forward slowly, placing himself between Elena and the rich kids, his shoulders broad enough to block Brandon's entire view. Rex, the German shepherd, growled low, a warning, deep and steady. Brandon swallowed hard. For the first time that night, fear flickered in his eyes. Jim didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a wall of steel. The entire diner fell silent, the cold outside suddenly feeling warmer than the tension inside. And in that quiet, everyone understood. The wealthy boys had chosen the wrong girl, on the wrong night, in front of the wrong man. The diner remained frozen in silence long after Brandon Keller stepped back from Jim Walker's shadow. For a moment, no one breathed. Snow clung to Jim's military parka, melting slowly down the dark fabric as if the cold itself bowed in his presence. Rex, the 7-year-old German shepherd with sharp amber eyes and a muscular frame built from years of training and loyalty, positioned himself half a step ahead of Jim, his body tense, weight evenly distributed, ready to act if the situation escalated. Elena Ruiz stood behind Jim, soaked in cold beer, trembling but trying to hold herself upright. Her dark hair stuck to her face, her uniform clinging uncomfortably to her small, chilled body. The humiliation burned, but the greater shock was the man who had stepped forward for her. Someone she had never met, yet whose presence felt strangely familiar. Jim stared at Brandon, his expression unreadable, the calm of a man who had faced far worse enemies in far more dangerous places. "That's enough," Jim said quietly, his deep voice carrying across the diner with more authority than a shout. Brandon opened his mouth to retort, but when Jim took a single step forward, the boy's bravado evaporated. One of the rich kids muttered nervously, "Come on, Brando, let's just go," his voice shaking as he tugged on Brandon's sleeve. Reluctantly, and only because fear outweighed pride, Brandon turned away with a hiss of annoyance, gesturing sharply for his friends to follow. As they exited, one of them lifted his phone again, filming Jim as if seeking revenge in digital form. The door shut behind them, and the diner exhaled. Slowly, conversations resumed in hushed tones, but eyes still darted to the towering veteran who had just walked into their quiet lives. Jim turned to Elena. Up close, she looked even younger, her olive-toned skin flushed from the cold beer and embarrassment. Her hands shook slightly as she wiped her face with her sleeve. Jim spoke softly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Let's get you out of here." She hesitated, glancing at the manager, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a round belly who had watched the entire scene unfold without lifting a finger. His guilt showed in the way he avoided her eyes, but he still didn't step forward. Elena lowered her gaze. She knew better than to expect help from people who relied on the Keller family's money. Jim draped his parka over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, smelling faintly of pine and cold air. Rex walked beside her, nudging her leg gently as if assuring her that she was no longer alone. Outside, the winter night was brutal. Snow blew sideways in sharp, icy sheets. The wind bit at any exposed skin. Jim walked at Elena's pace, steady and silent. She finally gathered the courage to ask, her voice small. Why did you help me?" Jim didn't answer immediately. Something in his expression shifted. Pain, memory, loyalty, all tangled into one. "Your name," he said slowly. "Ruiz." Elena looked puzzled. "Yes?" Jim's breath misted in the air as he stopped walking. Snowflakes collected in his short, graying hair. "I served with a man named Michael Ruiz," Jim said. "He was my brother in every way but blood." Elena's eyes widened. "My brother?" Jim nodded, and for the first time she noticed how deeply the war was carved into his face. Lines of loss, weight of promises, battles fought both on foreign soil and in his own mind. "Michael saved my life," Jim continued, "more than once." Elena's breath trembled. Snow clung to her eyelashes. He died over there." Jim looked away, jaw tightening. "I was with him at the end. His last words—" Jim paused, as if pulling the memory from a place scarred but still alive. He said, "If I don't make it home, look after my sister." Elena covered her mouth, tears welling up. She had always wondered about her brother's final moments, always wanted to know whether he had died alone, whether someone had cared. Now she knew. Jim placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I've been looking for you for months, but you moved around a lot. Different jobs, different addresses. Life wasn't easy," she whispered. Jim nodded. He understood that kind of survival, the kind fought quietly because no one else would fight it for you. Rex gently nudged her again, as if sensing her pain. Elena knelt to stroke the dog's neck. "He's beautiful," she said. "Strong." "He's been with me since the Marines," Jim replied. "Smartest partner I've ever had." The wind howled, forcing them to continue walking. A few blocks away, the streetlights flickered weakly, their glow struggling against the storm. Jim stopped again, suddenly alert. Rex stiffened beside him, ears pricked forward. Down the street, about 30 yards away, Brandon Keller and his friends stood huddled beside their expensive SUV. One of them held up a phone, screen facing them. Jim's eyes narrowed. He knew the danger immediately. Brandon wasn't just angry, he was planning something, uploading something. "They're posting it," Jim muttered. "Posting what?" Elena asked. "The video," Jim said. "The beer, the humiliation, the part where you were alone." Elena's heart pounded. If that video went online, she wouldn't just be embarrassed. She could lose her job, be mocked by the whole town, used as a joke by strangers. Brandon's father, Gregory Keller, owned half the businesses in Northbridge. They had the power to twist stories, to bury truth, to destroy lives without blinking. Jim's voice went low and controlled, the voice of a soldier assessing battlefield danger. "We can't let it spread. Not tonight. Not before we understand what they're planning." Elena stared at the boys, fear returning. Brandon noticed them and smirked, lifting the phone like a weapon. Rex growled, a deep rumble that vibrated through the snow. "Easy, boy," Jim murmured, but his own stance hardened. "They're taunting us," Elena whispered. "No," Jim said quietly. "They're testing how far they can go, and trust me, they're used to winning." The rich kids climbed into their SUV, tires spinning on the icy road before the vehicle sped off into the storm. Jim exhaled slowly. "This isn't over," he said. Elena looked up at him, seeking hope in a night that had given her nothing but pain. "What do we do now?" Jim adjusted his parka around her shoulders. "First," he said, "we get you warm. Then, I tell you everything about your brother. And after that, we prepare." "For what?" He looked down the snow-covered street where the SUV disappeared. "For the storm that family is about to bring." Rex pressed closer to Elena, as if claiming her into their circle. And for the first time in a long time, despite the brutal winter, despite the humiliation, despite the fear, Elena didn't feel alone, because tonight, in the coldest corner of Northbridge, a fallen soldier's promise had come home. Northbridge looked different when the sun came up. Not warmer, not kinder, but clearer in the way a winter town reveals its truth under daylight. Snow coated every rooftop like a mask, hiding the rot beneath. Elena Ruiz woke up to another morning of biting cold, and the growing ache that last night's humiliation hadn't been a nightmare. She sat on the edge of her small rented room, wrapped in an old gray blanket, still wearing the faded burgundy uniform she had washed by hand and hung near the heater. Her long, dark hair, now clean and dry, fell loosely over her shoulders, contrasting with the exhaustion shadowed under her eyes. She couldn't stop thinking about the video. The fear of the entire town seeing her humiliation tightened her chest with every breath. Meanwhile, across town, in the wealthiest mansion Northbridge had to offer, the Keller family estate rose behind towering iron gates and manicured hedges dusted lightly with snow. Inside, Gregory Keller, a man in his mid-50s with graying, dark hair combed perfectly back, the sharp jawline of someone who had never lost an argument, and cold hazel eyes that never revealed emotion, stood in his expansive office lined with photos of business achievements. Gregory was a tall, imposing figure with broad shoulders and the posture of someone used to commanding a room. His charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, emphasized authority and wealth, while a deep crease between his brows hinted at a permanent impatience. A man who did not tolerate trouble, especially if it made headlines. He held a tablet in one hand, replaying the video Brandon had taken inside the diner. The footage showed the beer pouring over Elena's head, her small frame trembling, her expression collapsing as laughter echoed around her. Gregory watched it with an unreadable expression. Not shame, not concern, only calculation. Behind him stood Pamela Wright, the Keller family's chief PR strategist. Pamela was a woman in her early 40s, tall and slender, with sharp cheekbones, a sleek blonde bob haircut, and thin-framed glasses that added to her intimidating professionalism. She wore a fitted navy blazer, carried a tablet full of crisis reports, and had the air of someone who had built her career cleaning up other people's messes, especially the Kellerns. Pamela's voice was calm but clipped. "Sir, the video has reached a few hundred views overnight, mostly local. Nothing viral yet. But the comments are not in our favor." Gregory exhaled slowly, clasping his hands behind his back. "People don't understand context," he said. "They never do. My son was provoked." Pamela paused. "The girl didn't seem to provoke him at all." Gregory turned sharply. "Pamela, our job is not to analyze truth. It is to manage perception. There is a difference." Pamela lowered her gaze. "Yes, sir." Gregory walked toward the window overlooking the snowy driveway. "Brandon is a good boy. He made a mistake, but we will not allow a waitress. What's her name?" "Elena Ruiz." "We will not allow Elena Ruiz to drag the Keller reputation through the mud." He tapped the tablet and handed it back to Pamela. "Spin it. Push out a narrative. Something about her being unprofessional. Maybe she started the confrontation. Hint at substance issues if necessary. People love gossip. They believe what disappoints them the least." Pamela hesitated only briefly. "I'll prepare statements for the press and social media." "And the diner?" Gregory's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Pressure them. Make them understand which side their survival depends on." Pamela gave a small nod and left the office, heels clicking sharply down the marble hallway. Moments later, Brandon himself entered. 19 years old, handsome in a manufactured way with neatly styled blonde hair and a jawline inherited from privilege, he walked with the swagger of someone who believed punishment didn't apply to him. "Dad," Brandon said, dropping onto the leather sofa with the laziness of entitlement. "Did you see the video? Everyone's talking about it." Gregory studied his son with cool eyes. "Yes. And why exactly did you think recording yourself humiliating a waitress was a smart idea?" Brandon shrugged. "It was funny, and she looked so pathetic. Besides, my friends loved it." "Your friends are idiots." Brandon rolled his eyes. Gregory stepped closer, his presence suddenly heavy. "Listen to me. You're my son. You will inherit everything I built. But if you want to survive in a town like this, you cannot afford weakness, and you cannot afford the wrong kind of attention." Brandon frowned. "So what now?" Gregory's voice turned ice cold. "Now we destroy the girl before she destroys you." Meanwhile, Elena stepped carefully through the slushy streets toward her workplace, nerves twisting in her stomach. She wasn't sure if the diner would even let her in. Her fingers were numb from gripping Jim's heavy parka, which she hadn't yet returned. When she arrived, she saw the owner, Timothy Grayson, a man in his late 40s with thinning brown hair, a potbelly, and a perpetually anxious face, standing outside the diner with a clipboard. Timothy was usually timid, but today he carried the jittery energy of someone under pressure. He flinched when he saw Elena. "Elena, we need to talk." Her heart sank. "Am I fired?" Not exactly," Timothy stammered, looking around nervously. "But I've been getting calls from people with influence." Elena understood instantly. "The Kellers." Timothy swallowed hard. "I can't afford trouble with them. The town inspectors, the tax board, everyone listens to Gregory Keller." Elena felt her knees weaken. "I didn't do anything wrong." Timothy looked pained. "I know, but sometimes being right isn't enough. You might want to stay quiet for a few days. Or longer." She felt the familiar sting of helplessness. Once again, she was paying for someone else's cruelty. Before she could respond, a deep, steady voice behind her said, "She did nothing wrong." Jim Walker stepped forward from the sidewalk, Rex by his side. Jim's tall, broad frame loomed over Timothy, who immediately shrank back. "Sir, I don't want trouble," Timothy whispered. "Trouble finds you whether you want it or not," Jim replied calmly. "But don't make the mistake of punishing the victim instead of the bully." Timothy looked torn, sweating despite the cold. I'll try my best." He hurried inside, leaving the door to swing behind him. Elena looked at Jim, overwhelmed. "It's starting, isn't it?" Jim nodded quietly. "The Kellers don't lose. Not without a fight." Elena hugged Jim's parka tighter around her body. "What do we do?" Jim looked down the snowy street toward the towering shadow of the Keller estate. His jaw tightened. "We brace ourselves, and we don't let them break you." Rex pressed gently against Elena's leg, as if promising she wasn't facing the storm alone. And for the first time, despite everything collapsing around her, Elena felt a spark. Not fear, not despair, but the first trace of something she thought she had lost forever. Northbridge had always been a quiet town, but quiet did not mean peaceful. It meant people learned to keep their heads down, to endure the cold, to adapt to the weight of the Keller influence pressing on every street, every business, every household trying to survive. The morning after the PR smear campaign against Elena began, the wind cut sharper than usual, blowing long ribbons of snow across the roads like warning signs. Jim Walker stepped out of his small cabin on the edge of town, boots crunching on the icy ground, Rex walking beside him with a steady, alert posture. Jim's cabin, made of old timber and crowned with a thin layer of frost, sat near the tree line. Simple, isolated, the kind of place a man retreated to when the world had given him more scars than answers. Jim touched Rex's head. The dog's thick black and tan coat bristled against the cold, but Rex was a seasoned partner, 7 years old and sharp as a blade. Today, Rex sensed the tension as clearly as Jim felt it. Something had shifted in Northbridge, something moving beneath the snow. Jim headed toward town with a purpose. He needed allies, not friends, those were rare, but men and women who understood how power moved, how injustice spread, and how a wealthy family like the Kellers could turn truth into dust. His first stop was the workshop at the edge of Industrial Row. Inside, sparks flew from a welding torch held by Danny Brooks, a broad-shouldered, heavily bearded man in his late 30s. Danny's hair was dark and messy, his beard thick and flecked with gray, giving him the look of someone who had lived too many hard years in too little time. Danny had once served as a Marine mechanic, the kind of soldier who could fix anything from a truck engine to a field radio. After the service, he tried to open his own repair shop, but the Keller real estate arm had raised his rent 3 times until he barely survived. Danny shut off the torch when he saw Jim, pushing up his visor. "Walker," he grunted, wiping his hands on a rag. "Heard you made some noise last night." "Noise found me," Jim answered. Rex sniffed around the shop, tail straight, ears angled in readiness. Danny crossed his arms, his face grounding into a serious expression. "I saw the video. Kid deserves worse. What do you need?" Jim didn't smile, but a small nod revealed his gratitude. "Names. People who've dealt with the Kellers. People tired of it." Danny tossed the rag aside. "I'm tired of it. I'll call a few others." That was all Jim needed to hear. He left the workshop with Rex leading the way. Their second stop was Carson's Deli, a small corner restaurant owned by Martha Carson, a short, stout woman in her mid-50s, with curly dark hair, deep crow's feet, and a warm but exhausted smile that never quite reached her eyes. Martha had once run a thriving local business, but Keller-owned supermarket chains had crushed her revenue. She welcomed Jim inside with a quick hug, something she rarely gave anyone. "Jim Walker," she said, brushing flour off her apron. "I heard about the girl, Elena, right?" Jim nodded. "She needs the truth on her side, and the town needs a spine." Martha sighed and leaned on the counter. "People here, they're afraid. Gregory Keller has strings everywhere. But that boy, Brandon, I saw the video. That poor child didn't deserve that." Rex sat calmly by the counter, eyes following each movement. Martha reached over to scratch behind his ears. "Rex, you handsome creature. You always know when something's wrong, don't you?" Rex wagged his tail once. Jim leaned in. "I'm putting together a list. People who want change." Martha lowered her voice. "I'll talk to the others. And Jim..." Jim raised an eyebrow. "Be careful. When men like Gregory Keller feel threatened, they don't just fight back, they erase." Jim left the deli with that warning echoing in his mind. Rex's behavior shifted as they headed toward the downtown district. The dog's tail stiffened, his nose lifted, catching scent trails only he could understand. Jim recognized it instantly. "What is it, boy?" Rex led him toward a narrow side street behind a row of shuttered shops. There, near a dumpster half buried in snow, tire tracks carved sharply into the slush, fresh, made within the last hour. Jim crouched, examining the pattern. Luxury SUV tires. Keller vehicles were often outfitted with the same model. Rex growled softly. Jim noted the direction. Someone had been watching the diner, or Elena, or maybe Jim himself. The storm was waking, exactly as he feared. Later that afternoon, Jim sent a message to another former Marine, Connor Hayes, a tall, lean man in his early 30s with sandy brown hair, a chiseled jaw, and clear blue eyes that seemed too gentle for the world he had survived. Connor now worked as a long-haul trucker, but he spent his off days helping people in quiet ways, repairing fences, delivering groceries to elderly neighbors, and refusing payment every time. Connor arrived at Jim's cabin wearing a thick brown jacket and fingerless gloves, shaking snow from his boots. "I saw the video," Connor said without greeting. "I figured you'd need help before this gets ugly." Jim's expression hardened. "It's already ugly." Connor leaned against the wall, folding his strong arms. "Kellers have had this town under their thumb for too long. People forget power belongs to the many, not the few." Jim agreed silently. Rex circled Connor once, then gave a satisfied snort. Connor laughed. "He remembers me." "He remembers everything," Jim said. As the afternoon darkened and the temperature dropped, Jim's informal network grew. Lester Hodge, a quiet 50-year-old carpenter with weathered skin and a limp from an old logging accident, joined them. Francis Doyle, a taxi driver in his 60s with a bald head, large glasses, and a deep, warm voice, promised to circulate information discreetly. Rita Chang, a restaurant owner with sharp instincts and sharper moral principles, agreed to report any Keller-related movement she saw downtown. One by one, people who had once been silenced by the Keller influence stepped into the cold to stand with Jim. The town wasn't loud about it. Northbridge rarely was. But slowly, the silence began to shift, from fear to resolve. That night, Jim and Rex walked Elena home. Elena clutched Jim's parka tightly around her, snowflakes melting into her dark hair. Her voice was small. "You think they'll stop?" Jim shook his head. "No, the Kellers don't stop until they crush whatever threatens them." Elena swallowed. "And we're the threat?" "Not yet," Jim said. "But soon." Rex brushed against Elena's leg again, watching every shadow on the street. Elena looked down at him. "He stays so close." "He knows who needs protecting," Jim said. "He always has." Above them, the wind howled across the rooftops like a warning cry. The storm had awakened, and the Kellers would soon realize they had awakened the wrong man. The cold in Northbridge had a viciousness to it that night, the kind of cold that didn't simply sting the skin, but crawled into joints, stiffening bones and thickening breath. Streetlights flickered along the industrial district, illuminating long shadows cast by abandoned warehouses, rusted fences, and stacks of wooden pallets buried beneath snow. The wind howled between the structures like a warning no one was listening to. Elena Ruiz pulled her borrowed parka tighter around her body as she walked home from her shift, her boots sinking into the icy slush with every step. Her long dark hair was tucked inside the coat's hood, but loose strands whipped across her olive cheeks as the wind picked up. She walked fast, too fast, because something in the air felt wrong. Ever since the Keller smear campaign had started, she felt watched. Not by the town, but by something darker, something personal. A sudden metallic clang echoed behind her, making her flinch. She spun around. Nothing. Only the empty street and swirling snow. But she wasn't alone. Behind a stack of wooden crates near the back of a crumbling warehouse, Brandon Keller, 19, tall and athletic with slicked-back blonde hair and a face sculpted to look innocent even when he wasn't, stepped out of the darkness. His breath steamed in the cold as he smirked, adjusting the expensive black bomber jacket hugging his shoulders. His designer boots crunched against the snow. Two rich friends followed him. Tyler Vaughn, 19, lanky with freckles and a nervous face, wearing a luxury green parka, and Kyle Mercer, 20, muscular with a squared jaw and close-cropped brown hair. Kyle wore a thick beige coat, his eyes colder than the night itself. Elena's heart jumped when she saw them. "Please," she breathed, voice tight. "I just want to go home." Brandon raised his phone, recording her, lips curling into a predatory smile. "Oh, we know. But you caused trouble, Elena. You made us look bad, and you're going to fix that tonight." Elena shook her head, stepping back slowly. "I didn't do anything." "You embarrassed me," Brandon snarled. "Now I have to teach you a lesson." Kyle moved to block her path, while Tyler lingered at the back, shifting nervously but still following orders like a dog chasing approval. The alley behind the warehouse felt smaller and smaller as the three boys closed in, their shadows stretching across the snow under the yellow lights. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice into something colder. "Delete everything you told the diner owner. Take the blame for what happened. Say you started it." "I won't lie," Elena said, her voice trembling but not collapsing. Something inside her, some flicker of dignity that Jim had rekindled, held her upright. Brandon's smile vanished. "Wrong answer." He grabbed her arm, hard. Elena gasped in pain, trying to pull away. Tyler shifted uneasily. "Dude, maybe we shouldn't—" Brandon cut him off. "Shut up. She needs to learn." Kyle moved forward to assist. The moment Kyle's hand reached toward Elena's shoulder, the air itself seemed to shift. A low, dangerous growl rolled through the alley like thunder announcing a storm. All three boys froze. From the far end of the alley, emerging through the falling snow like a force of nature, Jim Walker stepped into view. He walked with the quiet certainty of a man who had survived things these boys couldn't imagine. His broad shoulders filled the space, his military cold-weather parka dusted with snow, his jaw tense beneath a layer of stubble. His deep-set eyes were focused, controlled, soldier eyes. Beside him, Rex, the 7-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur and the posture of a trained warrior, moved like a shadow, hackles raised, golden eyes locked onto Kyle's outstretched hand. Jim didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Let her go." Kyle dropped his hand instantly, but Brandon held on longer than he should have, long enough to reveal the defiance of someone who believed money and power made him untouchable. "This is none of your business, old man," Brandon spat. "Everything here is my business," Jim said calmly. "You don't get to corner a woman in the dark. Not on my watch." Brandon scoffed, letting go of Elena with a shove. "You think you scare me? My dad?" "Your dad isn't here," Jim interrupted sharply. "But I am." The alley went still. Snow fell harder, piling on crates, dusting Jim's shoulders and Rex's fur. Jim stepped between Elena and the boys, his large frame forming a wall. Rex stayed half a step forward, his body low, ears pinned forward, teeth bared just enough to communicate exactly how close these boys were to making a fatal mistake. Brandon lifted his chin. "You can't touch us." "I don't need to," Jim said, "but you're going to walk away now." Kyle clenched his jaw. "Or what?" Jim's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the calm in his voice cracked into steel. "Or you'll find out exactly why your father should have taught you respect." A tense silence followed. Even Tyler sensed the danger and grabbed Brandon's arm. "Come on, man. Let's just leave." Brandon jerked his arm away but said nothing. His arrogance faltered, not gone, but shaken. The three boys backed up slowly, eyes on Rex's glowing amber stare. Snow swallowed their footsteps as they retreated toward the parking lot. Just before disappearing around the corner, Brandon turned back and pointed at Jim. "My father's going to crush you." Jim didn't blink. "Tell him to get in line." When the boys were gone, Elena finally exhaled, hands trembling. Jim turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded shakily. "If you hadn't shown up—" "You don't need to finish that sentence," Jim said. "Not while I'm here." Rex licked Elena's hand, sensing her fear dissolving. Elena laughed softly, the sound weak but alive. "He always knows," she whispered. "He always does," Jim replied. But the night wasn't over. Less than an hour later, in the luxurious Keller mansion, Brandon stormed inside, dripping snow onto marble floors, rage boiling in his eyes. Gregory Keller looked up from a stack of documents with a frown carved deep into his face. "What happened now?" Brandon slammed his fist onto the desk. "Jim Walker. He threatened me." Gregory leaned back slowly, expression unreadable. "Explain." Brandon told him everything, leaving out his own aggression, exaggerating Jim's involvement. Gregory listened, fingers tapping his polished desk. When Brandon finished, the room went still. Gregory stood, towering and cold. "That man is becoming a problem." Brandon smirked, relieved. "So what do we do?" Gregory's jaw tightened. "We remove problems." From the corner of the room, Pamela Wright, Gregory's PR advisor, lifted her head slightly, concern flickering across her sharp features. Gregory's voice hardened. "Jim Walker just made himself an enemy of this family. Brandon didn't understand the storm he had unleashed, but Gregory did. Meanwhile, Jim and Elena walked home with Rex gently trotting ahead. Snow fell softly now, as if the storm itself were catching its breath. Elena looked up at Jim. "Why did you step in tonight?" Jim's expression softened. "Because your brother would have done the same for me." The storm in Northbridge had awakened, and it was only getting started. The storm over Northbridge didn't arrive with thunder or wind. It arrived with silence. A thin layer of frost coated the storefronts of Main Street as the sun rose, turning the town into something brittle, something cold enough to crack. Inside the small diner where Elena Ruiz had worked for 2 years, the sound of heavy footsteps was the first sign that Gregory Keller had begun his counterattack. The tax officers, 2 middle-aged men in thick gray coats, briefcases in hand, pushed through the front door without greeting anyone. Their posture screamed authority, stiff shoulders, chins high, movements slow and deliberate, as if every inch of the room belonged to them. One of them, a tall man with thinning blonde hair and glasses too small for his face, introduced himself as Chief Compliance Agent Robert Lasker. His voice held the monotone confidence of a man who enjoyed causing inconvenience. His partner, a shorter and stockier man named Daniel Hurst, wore a permanent frown etched deep into his square jaw. The two immediately began demanding receipts, records, and old tax statements. They questioned staff with cold detachment. When they turned to Elena, standing behind the counter wiping mugs, her hands stilled. She had dark circles under her brown eyes from nights spent barely sleeping, and her olive skin looked paler than usual. Her dark brown hair, usually tied neatly, now fell loose around her face in tired strands. "Name?" Lasker asked mechanically. "Elena. Ruiz." The moment the surname left her lips, his brows rose slightly. A knowing smirk flashed between the officers. Elena felt her stomach tighten. By noon, the diner received an immediate audit notice, and the owner, Mr. Carson, a wiry man in his 60s with faded tattoos from a past life, pulled Elena aside. His gray mustache quivered nervously. "Kid, I like you, but I can't have trouble here. If Keller wants you gone, I gotta think about the business." Elena didn't argue. She simply nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." Outside, the cold bit at her cheeks as she stepped onto the icy sidewalk. A message from her landlord waited on her phone. "Rent increasing, effective next month. No exceptions." And below that, another message. "We might need to review your lease. Concerns have been raised." Another blow, another pressure point squeezed by the Kellers. Across town, on social media, an anonymous account posted edited clips of the beer incident, framing Elena as aggressive and unstable. The comments were vicious. Elena wanted to disappear, but Jim Walker did not let her. When Jim found her outside her apartment building, standing alone, hugging her arms, breath fogging in the cold, he approached with quiet purpose. Jim Walker, at nearly 50, carried himself with the steadiness of a man carved from stone. His short, dark hair, streaked with gray at the temples, stuck slightly under his hood. His face, rugged with sharp cheekbones and light stubble, held a seriousness that rarely softened. His military cold-weather parka clung to him like armor, dusted with snow. Rex, the 7-year-old German shepherd with a thick coat of black and tan fur, stood at his side, alert, tail still, yellow-brown eyes shifting to every sound. "Rough day?" Jim asked. Elena gave a trembling laugh. "Everything's falling apart." Jim didn't smile. "Only if we let it." He gestured for her to follow him inside, where the hallway heater hummed weakly. Jim's voice remained steady, calm. "Gregory Keller is squeezing you because he thinks pressure makes people break." Elena swallowed hard. "And doesn't it?" Jim crouched, tying back one of Rex's gear straps. "Not us." That evening, Jim began what would become Northbridge's quietest war. He didn't confront the Kellers with fists or threats. He confronted them with information. Jim reached out to former squad members, men who trusted him, men who knew what it meant to stand against corruption. First was Mark Bishop, a mechanic in his late 40s with broad shoulders, oil-stained hands, and a limp from a roadside bomb in Helmand. Mark had a sharp wit and a deep sense of loyalty. When Jim asked if Keller's construction branch had ever stiffed him on payments, Mark's jaw tightened. "Not just me," Mark said. "Half the contractors in this town. They bully, delay payouts, ruin credit, force people into silence." Jim took notes. Next, Angela Torres, a restaurant owner in her early 50s with long black hair streaked with silver and a fire in her eyes that never dimmed. She recounted how Keller's real estate division had intentionally delayed her building permits for months until she cooperated. Then there was Patrick Doyle, a former trucker with a round belly, red beard, and a gentle manner that contrasted with his massive frame. Patrick told Jim about illegal weight loads forced by Keller's logistics company and threats made when truckers pushed back. Each story added weight to Jim's growing file. Printed documents, screen captures, old invoices, witness statements, lawsuits long buried. Rex lay beside him at every meeting, ears turning with each new detail. For hours, Jim studied patterns, connecting strings of corruption like a battlefield map. Keller had built an empire on intimidation, loopholes, and bribery. Jim understood the language of power. He'd seen warlords operate on similar patterns overseas. "You can't hit a man like Gregory head-on," Jim muttered to Rex late one night, spreading papers across his kitchen table. "But you can cut the legs out from under him." The next morning came the first blow. Jim anonymously forwarded evidence of Keller's unpaid contractor debts to the Small Business Association, sparking scrutiny. Later that afternoon, 2 local journalists received documents linking Keller to land zoning manipulation. By evening, a Tuadaif, city council member whom Keller had bullied for years, finally spoke to Jim, revealing emails of coercion Keller never expected to see daylight. Each strike was silent, legal, precise, and devastating. Meanwhile, Gregory Keller, the man in his late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes cold as lake ice, sat in his office. Gregory wore tailored suits, polished shoes, and a permanent expression of control. But as daylight dimmed, his calm began to fracture. His assistant, a thin woman named Valerie Kim, with a tight bun and nervous hands, entered the office holding a tablet. "Sir, I think you should see this." Gregory's eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the growing reports, complaints, investigations beginning to swirl, like a storm forming around him. "Who's doing this?" he whispered, voice low and dangerous. A beat, then clarity, that veteran, that man. "Jim Walker," Gregory said aloud. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the hatred of a king whose throne had been touched. By the end of the week, the Keller name, once untouchable, showed cracks. Townspeople whispered, business partners hesitated, media pressure mounted. Elena, standing by the frozen lake near Jim's cabin, watched the first flickers of sunrise reflected in the snow. She turned to Jim. "Why are you helping me this much?" Jim's answer came quietly. "Because your brother saved my life, and because no one should have to stand alone." Rex nudged Elena's hand gently, tail wagging once. In that moment, surrounded by snow, silence, and the faint promise of justice, Elena realized the truth. This wasn't just a fight. This was a mission. And Jim Walker never walked away from a mission. The morning Northbridge woke up to the sound of news vans was the morning the town realized the fight had outgrown back alleys and quiet offices. The storm had become public. Frost still clung to windows, and the air carried a heavy silence, the kind that drapes over a community before something irreversible happens. As sunlight pushed through thick winter clouds, reporters from Portland and Seattle lined Main Street, stepping through the snow with heavy boots and cameras slung over thick jackets. They gathered outside the town hall, an old brick building with stone steps worn smooth from decades of use, waiting for the press conference that would determine the fate of one of the town's most powerful families. Inside, Elena Ruiz stood near the back wall, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She wore a simple dark sweater and borrowed coat, her long brown hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Though her olive skin was still pale from stress, there was something steadier in her eyes today, something stronger. She did not stand alone. Rex, the 7-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, sat beside her left leg, watchful and calm. And a few feet away, Jim Walker prepared for war. Jim stood tall near the podium, wearing his military cold-weather parka with the collar slightly raised. His dark hair, short and streaked lightly with gray, framed a face carved with battle-earned lines. His jaw was set, his gaze unwavering. The weight of years, war, loss, promises, seemed to settle into his shoulders. But today, he was immovable. The wooden doors opened suddenly, letting in a burst of cold air and a flood of camera flashes. Reporters surged forward as Gregory Keller entered. Gregory, in his late 50s, wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, though the dark circles beneath his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. His silver-streaked hair was combed back sharply, and his strong jaw was tense beneath a veneer of confidence. Behind him walked Brandon Keller, 19, still sporting the expensive bomber jacket, though he looked smaller today. Eyes swollen, lips tightened, bravado drained. 2 attorneys flanked them. Richard Dowling, a tall man in his mid-40s with a sharp jawline and trimmed beard, and Sandra Lim, a short but formidable woman in her late 30s with a sleek black bob and piercing eyes. They walked like a shield, but the shield was already cracked. The mayor called the conference to order, and Jim approached the microphone. The room fell into pin-drop silence. Outside, more reporters pushed against frost-covered windows, trying to listen. Jim placed a stack of documents, photos, printed emails, and financial records on the podium. The pages made a heavy sound, like something final. "My name is James Walker," he began, voice calm but resonant, U.S. Army veteran, and a citizen of Northbridge. Cameras flashed. Jim continued. "For years, this town has suffered under the influence of one family. Fear, intimidation, manipulation, hidden behind wealth." He flipped over the first page. Invoices from contractors unpaid, signatures falsified, zoning violations ignored. "Gregory Keller has built his empire not on success," Jim said, "but on silencing people who couldn't fight back." Elena watched Gregory's face stiffen. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jim revealed emails showing pressure on small restaurants, including Angela Torres's building permit delays, and testimony from trucker Patrick Doyle about illegal loading demands. Then came the video clips, unedited footage of Brandon dumping beer on Elena, provided by another teenager anonymously after seeing the backlash. The pure, undeniable cruelty on screen caused an audible murmur in the crowd. Brandon swallowed, shrinking in place. Elena gripped the edge of her coat harder. Her breath trembled. Jim took a deep breath. "This is the truth, and no one, no matter how rich, can bury truth forever." Cameras exploded in light. Gregory stepped forward instantly, voice raised. "These are outrageous allegations. This veteran is manipulating. We have the evidence, the mayor cut in sharply, and this town deserves answers. Reporters fired questions at the Kellers. Brandon stepped back, body shaking, face pale. Gregory clenched his fists. He glanced at his attorneys, but even they hesitated. The momentum had shifted. When silence returned, a microphone was placed in front of Brandon. The mayor's voice firmed. "Brandon Keller, you are required to respond." The 19-year-old swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. He looked at the room, then at Jim. Finally, his eyes met Elena's. Shame washed over his young face. His voice cracked. I'm sorry." Elena's breath hitched. Brandon continued. "I shouldn't have done any of it. I hurt you. I humiliated you, and it was wrong." Some murmurs of surprise echoed. The apology didn't erase the scars, but the world had finally heard the truth. Then the mayor turned toward Gregory. "Gregory Keller, you will be answering to the state attorney's office regarding business malpractice, fraud, and coercion." Gregory didn't speak. He couldn't. The fall of a king was never loud. It was quiet, cold, and merciless. The press conference ended in chaos, flashing bulbs, shouting reporters, police escorts. Gregory was escorted out. Brandon followed, shoulders slumped, stripped of arrogance. Elena stepped out of the town hall with Jim and Rex as the sun began to set. The sky above Northbridge glowed orange and rose-red, light reflecting off sheets of snow. It felt like the world exhaling after a long tension held too tightly. Elena walked slowly to the lake at the edge of town, where the snow-covered ground met the frozen water by the pine trees. Jim followed at a respectful distance while Rex trotted ahead, leaving little prints on the white surface. Elena knelt and pulled from her pocket a small dog, tag hanging on a chain, her brother Michael's. The metal glinted in the winter light. Her voice trembled softly. "Michael, an kong kan lo nua, Jim janguloi hua." Jim stood behind her, hands deep in his pockets, eyes reflecting the sunset. His expression was solemn, thoughtful, a soldier remembering the weight of a promise made on a battlefield far from this quiet town. Rex lay down near the water, ears relaxed, watching the light fade. Snow began to fall again, soft and gentle, as if closing the chapter with its own quiet blessing. Jim inhaled deeply, eyes on the horizon. This battle had no guns, no explosions, no medals, just honor, loyalty, and a promise fulfilled. And as Northbridge slowly healed, Jim Walker and Rex remained the silent guardians of a girl who finally had her voice back. In life, the greatest battles are rarely fought with weapons or noise. They happen quietly, in cold nights, in unfair moments, in the wounds no one sees. Yet even in that silence, God never turns away. He places miracles in our path through people who choose courage, loyalty, and kindness. Just as Jim Walker stood up for truth and Rex guarded with unwavering devotion, God uses ordinary souls to deliver extraordinary protection. Miracles do not always appear as bright lights from the sky. Sometimes they come as a stranger who steps forward at the perfect moment, a loyal dog refusing to leave your side, or the hidden strength inside you that God planted long before the storm arrived. Every one of us has a Northbridge in our life, a season of fear, injustice, or loneliness, and in those moments, remember that God sees you, God hears you, and God will send the right person at the right time. If this story touched your heart, please share it to spread hope. Leave a comment so we can pray together for those who are struggling, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and God's quiet miracles. May God bless everyone watching this video.